Armless from No Outspan by Deneys Reitz. In June 1924, I had a pleasant surprise. There is an institution known as the Empire Parliamentary Association, which all members of Parliament in Great Britain and the Dominions are entitled to join. Periodically, the association sends a group on visits of goodwill to different countries of the empire. And this year, South Africa had been chosen as their venue. Some 40 or 50 members of Parliament arrived at Cape Town on an extended tour of the Union and Rhodesia, and I was elected by ballot as one of the local delegates to accompany them. I found that my father was to accompany us as well. He was a member of the Union Senate, which had elected him as its representative. I was the more delighted at this, for we had seen but little of each other for a great many years. As children, my brothers and I had been his inseparable companions, by coach and on horseback, in the days when he was President of the Orange Free State Republic. But after he became State Secretary to Paul Kruger, we saw less and less of him. Then came the vicissitudes of the Anglo-Boer War and the subsequent exile, he in Texas and I in Madagascar. On our return to South Africa, he became President of the Upper House, and I was a struggling lawyer in a small village 1,000 miles away, so we met only at rare intervals. The Great War and the post-war activities that followed kept us apart, and now, after almost a lifetime, we were to travel together for the next few months. He soon became the central figure of the expedition, for he was a polished raconteur and a mine of information to our overseas guests, and I noted with pleasure how they deferred to him and his wide learning. He was a scholar in the best sense of the term. He had a mastery of Latin and Greek, and he spoke French, German, High Dutch, and Afrikaans with equal facility. His command of English and his knowledge of English literature were probably unsurpassed by any in this company of savants, authors, public men, and men of the world that made up our group of parliamentarians. On Dickens and Thackeray and Lord Macaulay and the earlier giants, he was an authority, but Sir Walter Scott and Robert Burns were his heroes. He had been educated in Edinburgh, and the British members of Parliament paid homage to, and must have wondered at, this gaunt old Boer who talked of the heart of Midlothian and Rob Roy, and of Tam O'Shanter, and the Cotter's Saturday Night, and who loved Scotland so dearly. No matter how widely the talk ranged, my father always held his own, and embellished the subject of each conversation from his inexhaustible store of general knowledge. And as for South Africa, he spoke with authority on every phase of its history and its economic conditions. From the way his hearers kept jotting down notes, I should think that the bulk of the information they took back with them was furnished by him during the course of our travels. Also, he possessed a keen sense of humor, and often he would round off his observations with some witty tale to illustrate his meaning. At Pretoria, after a day spent showing our guests around the Union buildings and other places, including President Kruger's old home, the discussions that evening, naturally enough, ran upon the days prior to the Boer War, when my father was Secretary of State of the Transvaal. He gave us a vivid account of Paul Kruger and his times, of his giant physical strength, his rugged personality, and the simplicity of his ways. In speaking of those times, the name of Mr. Joseph Chamberlain inevitably cropped up. He it was who had penned the dispatches from the British government to the Transvaal that had led to the war. My father had to reply, and their correspondence became increasingly acrimonious. I remember how my father used to return home from his office, fuming against Mr. Chamberlain and all his works, until my brothers and I regarded him as a sort of Corsican rogue. In both republics, he was held in execration as the man who was responsible for the disasters that overtook us. My father enlarged on Chamberlain's iniquities until some of the British delegates began to take up the cudgels on the other side, and a rather uncomfortable argument started. So he created a diversion. He said, "Gentlemen, I must tell you of the other Mr. Chamberlain." And he went on to relate that in addition to the colonial secretary, there had been a man of the same name who manufactured a popular remedy known as Chamberlain's cough mixture. The Boers were under the impression that the vendor of the patent medicine and the writer of the peremptory dispatches were identical. And he said he once heard an old burgher say to President Kruger, "Chamberlain's politics are damned rotten, but we must admit that his cough mixture, hoestruppels, is very good." There was hearty laughter at this joke, and the talk drifted into calmer waters. While we were looking at President Kruger's statue in Pretoria, I told the parliamentarians the story of Jacob Epstein, at work on a statue of one of his amorphous females, with the usual distorted limbs and bosom. As he carved, the figure showed signs of coming to life, and Epstein, like Pygmalion, took no chances, for dropping chisel and mallet, he ran for his life. My father said that this reminded him of another tale about Mr. Samuel Marx and the Venus de Milo. Mr. Marx was a Jewish citizen who had come to South Africa many years before. He had started as a rag and bone merchant, but in the end, by shrewdness and foresight, and by undeviating honesty, he had amassed a great fortune. He was a personal friend of Paul Kruger, and he was ultimately elected to the Union Senate. He decided to acquire a marble replica of the Venus de Milo, which happened to be for sale in Cape Town. When the statue arrived in Pretoria, and it was unpacked from the crate, Mr. Marx was indignant to find that the figure was armless. He blamed the South African Railways for careless handling and lodged a claim for damages. "What is more," said my father, "the railways paid up."